Welcome to the Red Light Exposé podcast.
We are an international grassroots survivor-led circle.
Our goal is to counter the growing acceptance of sex work ideology.
We aim to raise awareness of the harms of commercializing sex, meaning prostitution, porn, stripping, and BDSM.
Through honest, in-depth conversations, we elevate voices often ignored and silenced.
Together, we're challenging stereotypes and dismantling myths.
We envision a healthier, safer society, especially for girls and women.
We appreciate your company on this journey. Welcome back to the Red Light Exposé podcast. This is Elly Arrow speaking to you from Germany, and I have another guest from Germany with me today. With us is Silvia. She's the co-founder of the German Alliance for the Nordic Model, as well as the Action Group for Equality in Bavaria, located in Munich, which focuses on changing the situation for women in prostitution in terms of their human rights, but is also interested in other matters of social equality. Websites to all those organizations will be linked in the show notes. And Silvia is also well-traveled. She's lived many years abroad, including in Dakar, Senegal, Moscow, Russia, and Istanbul, Turkey. But today we will be talking about the Pelicot case and how it connects to the topic of commercial sexual exploitation to prostitution. And on this, Silvia authored an article for Nordic Model Now, which is one of our favorite resources all around these topics, which we'll also link. And we're going to be going over it. We're going to go deeper into it. We're going to have a whole discussion on how the logic and mechanisms behind this case connect to brothels, escorting, that whole system. And just for the uninitiated, for all those who dodged this in the news, just a quick reminder, the Pelicot case is about a French man named Dominique Pelicot who spent several years, I believe it was nearly a decade, inviting men online to come to his house to rape his wife, Gisèle Pelicot, who was drugged into a state of unresponsiveness. They filmed all these acts, and for almost a decade, they got away with it. But really good police work managed to eventually catch them, and then Gisèle Pelicot, having the bravery to go public with her case, waive her anonymity, and made sure that we know about it. So, Silvia, you start your article by stating that the rapists in this case were surprised that they were convicted. What were your thoughts behind opening with that?
Yes, apparently Didier Sambucci, one of the convicted, he reacted with astonishment and incomprehension when he heard he would be prosecuted. He, like his 50 other co-defendants, didn't think that what they had done would be nearly bad enough to involve the police. Even the few men who had been invited but did not take part in the rape, they did not go to the police. They did not report what was happening. Why did they not do it? I think they didn't do it because they did not take it so serious. Didier Sambucci said it was his house, his room, his bed, his wife. So it is like he was the owner of all these things, including the woman.
It's frightening. So in one small region of France, you find about 50 of them ended up being part of the case, but the police believes it was almost 70 men. They all lived in this small region of France and took up Dominique Pelicot on his offer to come to his house and rape his wife, who was either completely unresponsive or snoring, which we know because, again, they filmed it. And none of them thought that was particularly wrong. So they had a lot of different excuses for it. This is a kinky couple. Gisèle, somehow she takes pleasure from not being present during sexual acts. This is the logic that they presented, that some of their lawyers in court tried to bring across, that Dominique had deceived these men. They couldn't have known. This was a special sex thing between Gisèle and Dominique. And we do wonder, because when Gisèle, who for years was not aware this was happening, found out, the police asked her, "Are you a swinger?" Do you do wife swapping? Do you have sex with other couples? Because even the police had to check, could this have been a consensual arrangement? That's incredible.
Well, you may be thinking that this case was different because Giselle Pelicot was unconscious. And so, of course, there could not be consent. This was evident. But no one can know whether a woman who visits a swinger club with her husband does it from her free will, or does she do it to please him? Does she do it because he expects it? Does she do it because he's got the money, or he's threatening her? No one knows. And we cannot look into these intimate relationships, and we cannot see the dependencies, the threats and fears that motivates women to join in. For example, in my neighborhood, there is a couple who uses to fight a little bit at night. And so they leave the door to the balcony open so that they can share their relationship with the neighborhood. And one night, the man said to the women, "You shut up now. I bring 3 times more money home than you do. So what do you want?" I mean, this is evident as long as women care for their children and are in jobs where they make much less money than men, and they depend for the rent and for everything on the men, then you cannot really know what does she do because it's her own free will, and what does she do because she's more or less forced to it. But I would like to talk about another point, which is the society in one or the other way guilty of what happened? Because after all, what had these men in the Pelicot case, what had they done? What was so different from what hundreds of other men do all the time? No one had noticed or even cared about the messages they had been sharing online for years about their violent behavior. Doesn't that mean that society as a whole was involved? Because all of a sudden there was this huge media outrage when all this came to court. But before, everyone could have watched it on these platforms.
Yeah, there was huge surprise. So many men in one small region. Oh, really? Men of every occupation, every class, so many married men. And they filmed it. It's just a particularly large case of crimes that happen all the time. Like you say, they happen in marriages, they happen in brothels, they happen in unequal workplaces. Friends of mine have been sexually harassed by their bosses trying to invite them into BDSM arrangements. And most of the time, women do not make these cases public because they know exactly that they would be blamed. And it's very unusual to have a case where people believe the victim. Most people believe the victim very strongly. It's pretty much the perpetrators and their lawyers who are still trying to, or well, they've been convicted now, many of them, who tried to twist the narrative. I mean, like you write in your piece, this is, especially in the system of prostitution, we see this all the time. Men come to an apartment or house they've never seen, to a man and a woman they've never met. The man tells them, this is how we do it. This is what you can and can't do. This is the substances we use. Put your shoes here, put your jacket there. This is a prostitution-based experience that happens all the time. And men who go to brothels like this don't ask, how's the woman doing? Is she on drugs? Does she want this? To the point that, of course, in prostitution context, also, women out of economic pressure have had to offer a drugged experience and a sleep experience. This is something that Johns demand.
Yes, I can give you some more examples, yeah? Apparently, payment was not involved in the Pelicot case, but the rapist displayed all the typical behavior of Johns. Interestingly enough, that Pelicot did not ask for money because he was highly indebted, so he could have used the money. But I thought if he had asked for money, then much earlier one of these men would have gone to the police, because in this case, when you ask for money and then there is something which you do not like so much, or you're not satisfied enough, or who knows, then maybe you think, okay, I'm betrayed. And then you might ask for the money back, and then maybe there would be disagreement or something like that, and a conflict. And maybe that's why Pelicot preferred not to ask for money, to avoid this kind of conflict, to avoid that maybe such a conflict might end up at the police. I mean, I didn't see any comments about this topic. But what are the parallels between Dominique Pelicot, his friends, and ordinary sex buyers? They all thought it was normal for Gisèle Pelicot, for her husband to hand over his wife's body for them to use and abuse sexually. And they had no qualms about using Gisèle Pelicot's body, even though unconscious. And of course, she could not consent. So that's the same thing that happens if you hand over the money to a pimp and then you go to use the body of a woman in prostitution. I don't see a big difference, only that the women in prostitution, she's not unconscious.
Well, sometimes they are. They're often on drugs or drug.
Yes, very often they are on drugs because otherwise they cannot support it. Another parallel, they didn't question what was happening and they considered it completely acceptable. None of them, not even the men who refused to join in, reported it to the police. Why not? Maybe they thought, oh, so what? Just another perverted guy. So what? All of these men had a total lack of empathy for Gisèle Pelicot. Apparently, they did not see her as a human being. And just like Johns, they bragged about their behavior online, including descriptions of the violence, descriptions of Gisèle Pelicot's body. And they joined forces with other men in online forums in a competition to outdo each other's misogyny. So it's like a man's thing. They collaborate and they join in the violence against women.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Dominique Pelicot was writing down his recipe. How much of the substance do you need to give to your wife? Or one of the men he was working with wanted to do this to his mother. So son against mother violence is a completely under-discussed, underestimated problem. That includes sexual violence from sons towards mothers, as well as femicide. So there are entire forms of men exchanging, do you want to replicate this at home? And always filming, always with a camera, exchanging the clips, discussing the clips, like a whole drug rape subculture that they felt very cozy and relaxed in for almost a decade, which of course makes you wonder how many more of these cases are out there, but they haven't caught them. And what was also clear to me when I finally deep dove on this case, which I avoided for a long time because I knew it would be very dark, is the more precise things that they were doing to Gisèle that are not that shocking to me because they are done to women in pornography and prostitution every day. So that starts with Dominique. When he labels the videos, or sometimes when he speaks or other men speak in the videos, they use very disgusting misogynistic language towards Gisèle. They slur her constantly. They also use terms like MILF or GILF, which come from pornography. So this is mother I'd like to fuck or grandmother I'd like to fuck, which is not some kind of appreciation of the female body in every stage of life, but it is to say she's a whore when she's young and she's a whore when she's older. And this is what the middle-aged or older whore looks like. Also, Dominique Pelicot, you wonder, why would he invite other men? Well, this is not an unusual fetish. It's a very common one. There's entire pornography genres and websites dedicated to something called cucking, which is short for cuckolding, which is when a husband knows his wife is sleeping with somebody else and he bears it, he tolerates it. And somehow, in the way that paraphilias can develop, Dominique Pelicot thought it was sexually attractive to see his wife abused by other men, often especially non-white men, like black men. There's a whole dimension there that we will cover in more detail in another episode. And finally, of course, this part about drugging is a not irregular execution of one of the most serious and dangerous paraphilias called somnophilia, which is attraction to sleeping people, which is very, very close to necrophilia, which is attraction to dead people and corpses. And you even have moments in the videos that they show in court where someone says, is she okay? Because she was so still and her body so limp. It was like she was deceased, like she was dead. So this is not shocking if you are familiar with BDSM, pornography, and prostitution, because this is done to women who are less socially acceptable than, a grandma who's lived an upstanding life. Every victim deserves compassion, but if you are an exploited Roma woman from Bulgaria, let's say, you are less of a clean victim to the public than maybe Giselle was in some ways. And that's why we have not talked about this, even though it's been happening for a long time.
Oh, this is very complicated. I don't know about all these paraphilias, and I'm also not really wanting to indulge into these things because it's scary somehow. But what I think is if you're constantly using porn and prostitution, that you may get bored by normal, let's call it normal sex, because it is dehumanized sex. So you are not able to build up a relation. It is all fake. So what you need for your dopamine, you want to get your body drugs out of the sex. So then, of course, you need each time a stronger stimulus. And that's also a reason why it comes to more and more strange paraphilias, I think. This is just because it gets boring if you do the same act several times. If there is no relationship between you and the object you use. Let's say it with these simple words. I do not know about all these paraphilias, but it makes sense that you need stronger and stronger stimulus because you cannot get satisfaction from the human relationship. And that's all porn and prostitution is about. It is a lie at the beginning, and maybe it's for a very short while, it gives you some relief, but it leaves you empty, and you need bigger and bigger stimulus to become happy for a very short moment. I think this also leads to frustration.
Connecting to what you said about somebody needing a bigger and bigger stimulus, Dominique Pelicot is a very good example of this, because when the police trace the videos, they see he starts out just undressing Giselle, which is serious enough. Then he puts new clothes on her that she would never wear, that she says she doesn't like. So he violates her boundary even more. Then he starts abusing her himself. Then he needs to invite one man, then another, then another. Then they film that. So you see in this one man the escalation of it getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's one very serious and dark thing that was not reported universally and that maybe came somewhat later in the police investigation that I do want to mention, that we don't forget it. There is serious grounds to suspect that Dominique Pelicot has committed serious offenses against women in the past. Not just the upskirting, which he was initially arrested for, but there is a woman who survived an attempted drugging, rape, and attempted murder several decades ago, who at the time gave the police a sketch of the assailant, who later said, "This is Dominique Pelicot." She recognizes him, but the DNA evidence, there's some reason why it's not available or not admissible. And there is another case going even further back where a woman was drugged, raped, tortured, and killed that is also suspected to be connected to Dominique. So we see one man committing the full range of sexual offenses, from upskirting possibly down to femicide. And I would not be surprised if this is true, because everything he and the men are doing is necrophiliac. And the end point of necrophilia is, of course, murder. But we don't just want to focus on the worst outcomes of what men might do in their paraphilias. We want to talk about the wider culture. And in your article, Silvia, you wrote a lot about the wider French culture that rolls out the red carpet to men like this. So do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, of course. I'd love to. For a long time, libertinage was the hallmark of many French intellectuals. Violence against women has been acceptable in France ever since Marquis de Sade popularized it. Marquis de Sade, this was in the times of French Revolution, First French Revolution.
He's the man after whom they named sadism, so the modern word sadism goes back to him, and he's famous for sexually torturing women and girls.
Right, and this was seen as, as fun. And it's ironic enough that the village where the house of the Pelicot family is Masson, and there is the Masson castle, which belonged to the Marquis de Sade. Even though times have changed, thanks to the women's movement, tolerance is still widely practiced, even by women. What I mean is there is a mixture of indifference and turning blind eye to violence against women and girls. Even some women say, well, yeah, that's okay. Sadomasochism is just BDSM, if two adults are willing to do this, then it's up to them. And the Marquis de Sade has role models and emulators all over the world.
Absolutely. It's disturbing to go into a space that calls itself feminist and to see sadism be considered something like a minority sexuality. I've even seen people compare it to being gay, which I think is offensive. Or to say if somebody practices it who is bisexual or homosexual, then it must be a good thing. This is a whole topic where I would like to invite a guest to focus on this. The chemsex scene is, of course, highly problematic. It does hurt a lot of gay men, and you wonder how many of them are really consenting, or can they consent? That's a whole topic in of itself, of course. Just because gay people do it doesn't make it good, of course. But we have to remember when it comes to drugging and sexual abuse, the biggest group is still straight men doing it to women. And that is not oppressed sexuality. That is a long, long historic practice. It is crazy that anyone would celebrate it or even want to place it in pride. Because I remember one year I was at a pride event in Hamburg and I saw men putting ropes on women, tying them up on trees. What does this have to do with gay or bisexual people, right?
May I give you another example?
Yes, please.
Okay, every 2 years, the Protestant Church of Germany has a huge congress with thousands and thousands of visitors. And they have a stand, a BDSM stand. It's called like Christians for BDSM or something like that. And so I'm wondering what has BDSM to do with the Protestant church. Of course, you would not find this in Catholic church, only Protestant. They want to be modern. And then I talked to the person who's in charge of this, because we also had a stand at this huge congress. And I asked him, what are these people doing here? He said, they're very friendly people and they're very nice. They are here since many, many years. So yes, maybe they're nice to you, but I'm not so sure if they are nice to other people. And for me, this is BDSM. If it's done like at home or so, it's just another word for domestic violence, because you can never really know if there is real consent or not. It's another question if you should or could, if it should be forbidden or not. That's another question, but it should not be exposed at Congress of a Christian church. But let's go back to France. Not so long ago, a rapist was prepared to become president Président de la République, President of France, the socialist Dominique Strauss-Kahn. And he really had good chances to be elected. But then his downfall came in the US. And it was because of Nafissatou Diallo. This is an African-American hotel employee, and she broke the silence and spoke out what happened to her. She was raped by him. The sexual violence became evident because, and I would say these people are real heroes, because she was supported by the management. And I am wondering how often Dominique Strauss-Kahn did this to other women. It is only known, he was known to be a womanizer, and there was a lot of gossip about him, the way he treated, for example, journalists. But I assume he did not treat the journalists exactly the same way how he treated the cleaning lady in the hotel. But gradually it became clear that there were a lot of other victims in France. And only after this case with Madame Diallo, it was found out. And I think she was the first one who forced us to change the sides of the shame, long before Me Too. And this was an important milestone in the fight for women's rights in France. And this was set by Nafissatou Diallo.
Well, I'm so glad the hotel supported her. I didn't know about that.
Yes, this was so important. The hotel manager, he believed the cleaning lady, and he did not believe the future president of the French Republic. And this is an act of bravery.
The parallel with the Pelicot case is, of course, well, it's two French rapists called Dominique. But it's important that somebody takes it seriously. This is like both the police, and that the victim has a support system of some kind. For Giselle, it's very important that her family stood behind her, because we know so often when a case like this comes out, the family denies it, doesn't want to see it, shields the perpetrator, and exiles or blames the victim. This is the outcome for countless cases, which of course makes it near impossible to go public.
Yes. I mean, too often we see the opposite. Unconditional solidarity of the family members with the rapist. And this is also the case with some of the co-defendants who see their unblemished family life threatened by the trial rather than by their own actions. And also, if you see then Dominique Strauss-Kahn's wife, she was also on his side. Maybe not on the long run, because his name seems to be completely erased from the French list of important persons. But also if you see Ghislaine Maxwell, a woman who really, she was also perpetrator, and she really supported her man. So it's not a question of being man or women, but it's more a question of if you take responsibility or not. Because the management of the hotel in the US where this case happened, as far as I remember, I think it was a man.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. Sometimes female family members, I think there's a lot of complicated psychological things that go on where they, especially to protect themselves, start denying it, even though likely if one female family member is victimized, probably the others are too. And Dominique Pelicot, of course, doesn't just target Giselle and doesn't just teach other men how to do it. He targets his daughter and he targets the wives of his sons. And there's worry that something might have happened to the grandchildren in the family as well. Though to this day, he does not reveal everything he's done. He toys psychologically to this day with the victims. He will most of the time only admit what they can prove. So whenever they uncover another piece of his crimes, he says, yeah, okay, I did that, but that's it. And then they find more. And then he says again, yeah, but that's it. Also, one thing he keeps doing is saying, but I love my family. And I love Giselle. She's the love of my life, light of my life, my Madonna. He wrote letters like this to his family as well. I think another level of psychological torture.
Well, this is a difficult question, but I think sexual violence against children is also some kind of lifestyle, and it's deeply rooted in our culture. In France, you see a long list of cases of children and young people who have been sexually abused and exploited by so-called intellectual bon vivants. You can fill a library with their books. And France fills also entire film collections and bookshelves with the trivialization of the sexual abuse of children. And in a self-satisfied bohemian society, some men make a hobby of destroying children's personalities before they have a chance to develop. And frequently with the complicity of the parents, and especially with the complicity of the mothers, especially if these young girls come from families where the parents are divorced or families who have lots of problems.
We want to take a moment to thank you for your listenership. As an independent volunteer collective, our episodes are only made possible because of donations from people like you. Please visit our website, www.redlightexposé.com, and click the Donate tab. There, you can find ways to financially support us one time or on a monthly basis. Your support is greatly appreciated. And now, back to the episode.
And that's why I think it's a mistake in the way that the media talks about Dominique Pelicot. They do often make him seem like especially bad. They call him monster of Avignon. And I keep thinking, well, first of all, there is not one. There were 70 other men. So that's like 70 monsters, plural, of Avignon. And beyond that, like you said, this grew from fertile ground in France. This is, yes, it's pornography, film pornography, but even older. Yes, it's abuse of adults, but also minors. Everything connects. Some of the most powerful men in that society are known to violate consent, to rape. And France is not unique. You mentioned Maxwell talking about how the most powerful man in the world, Donald Trump, all the evidence says that he is a rapist. And also possibly now with new revelations, there might have been murders of victims in the Epstein, Maxwell, Trump. There's a lot of people implicated. We will cover this another time. But when society is shocked, little French village, middle-class family, everything looked so fine and cozy. But it exists, from the slums up to the White House. So it's not a mistake or aberration in the culture. It's a logical outgrowth because we have too many systems that enable, celebrate, and protect. It's very simple, really.
Right. And it's also very typical that only decades later, victims come forward with the truth of what happened. But even then, they only have a chance of being heard if they can express themselves in an intellectual way, if they're able to write books and so. And this outrage on a national level has failed to materialize. It never happened, except now with the Pelicot case. And that's a very, very important change. Shall we talk about Germany also?
You did mention that Germany needs to take a long, hard look in the mirror because the same forums that Dominique and his accomplices used, we have them over here. Do you know more about that?
Yes, of course. In Germany, abuse was notorious in both churches, as you know. It is interesting that the Protestant church likes to talk about celibacy. So it is in the Catholic Church, you're forced to. But the Protestants do not expect this. And normally Protestant priests, they are married in many cases. Then the Protestants they like to make a clue between these sexual abuse and the celibacy. But this is not correct because both churches were notorious for sexual abuse, not only the Catholic Church. Pedocriminals have also been active in a number of professional fields, especially in social work or educational work, and sometimes with support of politicians. Unlike in France, child sexual abuse is not romanticized in literary terms, but the damage is just as bad. Some social and educational reformers succeeded in manipulating not only the victims, but also professionals, politicians, and the public. For example, at the Odenwaldschule, where the director was the director of a school, but at the same time he was director of a pedophile network. And there is a worrying resurgence of pedocriminals gaining influence.
And that goes across the world, but, as they say, look outside your own front door first for this problem. And one thing that we always wonder, and you and I were wondering when we prepared for this, is why is it so widespread? That is not exactly an obvious question. Like, what is the purpose? Okay, it's the personal, maybe fleeting, that's why it escalates, satisfaction for the perpetrator. But it's more than that. In this podcast, we keep trying to get closer to defining that purpose well. And one that really stood out for you and me as we were discussing Pelicot and all the cases, the many, many cases that connect, where groups of men target a woman or multiple, or a child or multiple. And that is, frankly, that they bond over it, that there is a type of brotherhood of abuse, basically. And that takes many different forms depending on the class situation or the geographic or cultural context. Do you have more thoughts about that?
Well, I think often enough, if men have some kind of relationship with women, then they think about what does this do for their status. If they think about their status, they do not think about what does my mother think about me, but they compare themselves with other men. You can also see this like in a discotheque. There is one man who is like the big star, and if he dances with the girl, then all the other guys also want to dance with the same girl. It is not so important if this girl is really, if they really like it. It's more important to play an important role as compared to the other boys. Often then the women have more or less the role of trophy, but it is not so much the case that men really are interested in these women, but they try to gain status.
And it's not just which women or how many women, but also how much power do I have? And so Dominique was clearly saying to these other men, look how far I can go, and she can't do anything. And look how long I've been doing this and how meticulously. Isn't this impressive? Your article, there's one section that I'd like you to speak about more, which is whether it is Pelicot case or another one. You write that it's not necessarily helpful to blame all men, to look at men as a group culpability, or also ignore the role of women and how they might be complicit. And you say it's important to reject collective guilt, but demand collective responsibility. Can you clarify, what do you mean there?
Oh, yes. I think this is a very important point because we should not blame all men because not all men are guilty. We should also not talk all the time about patriarchy, but because regardless of the victim group, rape is always about the exercise of power and domination, often with a sadistic component, a brutalizing one-sided war against women, girls, and male children waged with vastly unequal means. But violence against women and children with the intention of gaining access to their body and breaking their will is no less culturally rooted in Germany than in France and in many other regions of the world. But does this mean that all men are perpetrators and should do some soul searching and repent? I think no. If all men are perpetrators, nobody is ultimately responsible. There may be a round of consternation, a little posing in penitential garb, but nothing will happen. Nothing changes. So you have to name their names. You have to blame the real perpetrators and not talk about patriarchy and all men and the problem is men. No, the problem are these men who are behaving like this. And there are many, many, many of them, but not all. I think it's more important to win the other men so that they can see violence is not anchored in their DNA, and pointing to an abstract patriarchy as the culprit will not lead to social change. We must name the real perpetrators and hold them accountable. Also, not all men hang around on online platforms celebrating violence against women. Not all men are Johns, and not all women are innocent. Many women support male domination because it is advantageous for them. They sit, for example, in the parliament and fight against restrictions on prostitution, against the protection of marginalized and exploited women, in the interest of those who do it voluntarily and in line with the hardcore neoliberal agenda. Also, women are the pillars of the patriarchy, and sometimes the green and red flagged pillars. What I mean is placing the blame and guilt on men as a collective. This is a construct drawn from identity politics. It's attractive as an explanation for people who are a little bit lazy in their thinking. People who want to have the world neatly sorted into victims and perpetrators. But it does not help us. We should try to win men as allies in the fight against violence against women.
I think this is a really difficult point and one that I struggle with as well. Some of this is a bit semantic or situational, like when is it helpful to use a term like patriarchy? Sometimes I think it's important. Sometimes it's too much. Sometimes it's too abstract. So, I agree with you. It should be used carefully. On the other hand, where does men's responsibility begin for supporting a system like prostitution or rape culture at large? The reality is that most men do consume pornography. This is not a minority of men. I also think there are aspects in which men are victims of pornography, like when they are little boys, they don't make a conscious decision to become lifetime consumers. We have other episodes where we go into those nuances. I mean, we've done a whole series on this podcast where we have invited men who are themselves survivors of abuse. We've at other times talked about female perpetration or co-perpetration, and we've invited male allies because we also think this cannot be done by women alone. And sometimes just saying men versus women is too simple and too divisive. But at the same time, also every man benefits from having or potentially having power in this society over a significant number of women. So it's like a careful balance that I haven't fully sorted out myself. And you say as well, there is a collective responsibility. All of society has a responsibility towards children. All men who say, I do not support this, I stand against this, are called to action. This is where I can't give a fully clear reply because I haven't sorted out my own thoughts. But do men need to do some soul searching? I would say yes. Don't stand still and looking at your own life. But I do think some of them do have to Is my own relationship equal? How do I treat my girlfriend? That is a question that I absolutely want men to ask themselves. They do not have to look in the mirror and see Dominique Pelicot, my God, you know? And I also don't want them to get stuck there and then go, oh, I guess I'm bad. I guess there is an evil caveman in every man and every boy. That's not it either. We need collective action. We also need individual soul searching. Women need to soul search how we're hurting each other as well, and abandoning each other and taking the easy route, siding with abusive systems or individuals. So this is a conversation that I think will be ongoing here because it's a hard one.
Yes, I think you mentioned already very important points. What I want is a shift from collective indignation to a community of responsibility, because indignation is always very cheap to have. It does not mean nothing after all. It's a kind of posing. And I think indulging in indignation can also be intoxicating, but it does not result in targeted political action. And that's what we need. We reject the collective guilt of man. I reject it. What we demand is a collective responsibility. And this means that, for example, men in politics, they still like to assign the topic of violence against women as an area to women. So they say, oh, no, don't ask me. This is a women's topic, so please go to my colleague. But this is not right because it affects women and men in different ways, but equally. We are living together in a society. How could a man say, well, violence against women? Yes, interesting topic. Please go to my colleague to address her. It's none of my business. I do not do any harm to any women. So it's a political issue maybe, but it's not my responsibility, and I do not care so much. And cohesion in society is not care work for women or the task solely of a women's minister, for example. Cohesion won't come about through propaganda from the state or from NGOs. It requires deep critical self-reflection from all of us. And social cohesion is created and practiced in relationships and families, in friendships, neighborhoods, and so on. And the private sphere is political. We know this since many years. The private sphere is political. And politicians must create a framework that ensures that violence of any kind in families and relationships is recognized and effectively punished. And this is not a minor issue only affecting marginalized groups, but it's a mission to save our democracy, because democracy cannot work if the relations in the families and neighborhoods and the relations between men and women are so deteriorated as they are now.
We've had another episode about South Korea. And in South Korea, first of all, to fully acknowledge the extent of violence and intentional impoverishment of Korean women, as well as a lot of working class Korean men. But in South Korea, this is the country worldwide that has some of the worst relationship between men and women. So if you do surveys and you ask people, South Korean women feel very oppressed. If you ask South Korean men, they also feel very oppressed by being men. This is not the only reason, but it's one reason that birth rates have plummeted. It's one reason that society feels atomized. It's one reason why very radical right-wingers, or well, a right-winger and his party who jumped on this issue and they fired up the male base, the male voters, while antagonizing women over and over. I mean, this is a very, very potent example of what you're saying with the breakdown of democracy. What is a feminism that men are okay with? This is really a difficult question because I think feminism has to make men uncomfortable before it makes things better. I do think that's part of it. I do think a lot of women and girls and children's rights work is going to be unpopular before it produces a healthier society. This makes this so tricky. I want to take everyone along for the journey, but I don't know if I always can, you know?
Oh, yeah. You opened so many very important issues and questions now. I also think that feminism is important for women and men because it cannot be only how do we get more out of it, equal pay. Of course, that's very important because it's also the basis of everything. But men should understand that feminism is important for them as well, because it's not a matter of winning a gender war, but it's a matter of finding a better way to live your relationship. And there are many men who understood this and who want to have a better life with their partners and their children and their families and everyone.
And other men too.
Yes, right. I mean, in my environment, I see a lot of people where I think, yes, these men, they're really on the right way. But feminism is misunderstood by others who just see themselves as losers. And then within their own family, they see themselves in a similar situation and they try to, instead of forgetting about this destructive idea of winners and losers, they try to suppress their wives to gain points for their egos. And this finally it leads to some kind of intrafamiliar war between men and women. And this is very sad because it should not be like that. And it's fueled by the right-wing party, which always gains from these antagonisms because it is in the DNA of their political thinking that there are always winners and losers, and you have to be on the winner side, and if you're a loser, you're a nothing. So funny enough that there are many people who fear to be losers joining these political groups. It's completely irrational because people join parties who are not on their side, but on the side of the winners, so-called winners. But they will never belong to the winners, even if they try to join this kind of clubs.
Yes, absolutely. And to quickly tie that exact point back to the Pelicot case, some of the German media gave profiles of the perpetrators, and you had men the first time that they went to the Pelicot house, it was because, you know, a relationship breakup, a hard day is mirrored in, of course, brothel use. Lost your job, you can go to the brothel, feel like a strong man again, except it's an illusion. And an hour later, you feel miserable again. So it's a deal with the devil for men. They are not the primary victims, but they are harmed by it. And where I would absolutely agree is that a lot of people feel very antagonized by feminism, but most feminism is not separatist, and separatism has its own right. Sometimes there need to be women-only spaces. So that's a thing we can cover another time. But most feminism is trying to repair this deeply damaged relationship between men and women, is trying to make men trustworthy again so that women can trust, so that healthy relationships of all kinds, I'm not even just talking sexual, romantic, familial, all kinds can exist. And if feminists didn't believe that this could be possible, that it could be better, that abuse could really be rare and shocking. I wish we had one or two monsters a decade in that it was shocking, which right now it's not. That's the goal that feminism has, and it can only have this if it has hope for men and believe in men. So I think that's important to emphasize. And also to stick on the topic of hope, after we've covered so much heavy stuff, the Giselle Pelicot case is also inspiring. Despite of all the things she went through, Giselle invited the public to see her ordeal, to feel with her. She spoke up several times in court, as has her daughter, who's authored a book. I can link the book so people can read it. I think it's been translated now in multiple languages as well. And similarly, when it comes to prostitution, we see that survivors speaking up makes a huge difference. So women like in Germany, Hushka Mao, Sandra Nora, in Ireland, you have Rachel Moran. There's so many, I could name so many of them. And of course, my co-hosts on this podcast. It inspires others to come forward. There was just recently another case in the UK of a woman who was drugged for years and then raped by her husband. Her name is Joanne Young, and the perpetrator is called Philip Young. He's a conservative UK counsellor. I will link about that case as well. Probably without Giselle, we might not know about Joanne. And it may now be a little bit easier for Joanne to get justice because Giselle got some of it. And also, to reconnect it to men and young men, I see an increasing number here in Germany and France too, very inspired, that the French prostitution abolitionist, which is also rape abolition movement, has a lot of young men who get this is important and that they need to join it. This is something that is going on. It makes me hopeful.
Yes, you're right. And then think about the police in France. They pursued Pelicot for upskirting women, and this led to the exposure of his more serious crimes, which might otherwise have been still continuing. And we should ask ourselves whether the authorities would have looked so closely and investigated so consistently into the case in Germany. Germany is now officially regarded and officially assigned by the second person in state, the president of the federal parliament, Julia Klöckner, assigned as the brother of Europe. Violence and other crimes against women involved in prostitution have become so commonplace that some people have become resigned to it. So we see in Pelicot case that something has substantially changed in France, and that is the awareness for violence against women. I'm very glad about this. Maybe we talk about Sweden a little bit. Sweden has long understood that prostitution is violence and implemented a law, the Nordic model legislation, in 1999, and France followed it nearly 2 decades later. The European Parliament has confirmed that prostitution is not only largely based on violence, but that it is violence itself. Same with the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe and the United Nations and many other international organizations. They have long been calling for measures to tackle man's demand for prostitution. The Nordic model is the most effective way of doing this. Think if we implement the Nordic model as France did 10 years ago, then at least it's a clear statement that we do not tolerate violence against women, which is always connected to prostitution and to pornography.
Because we have to be very, very clear. We cannot say, oh, ordinary women, no, you can't drug them and then film them and rape them. But you can go to the dominatrix or the sklavia, which is kind of the inverse of a dominatrix here in Germany, a so-called professional, so-called submissive, and you can do it to her. There cannot be two classes of women, one to protect and one to harm. This has never worked, will never work, and so the law needs to be there to protect all of them. And as another piece of hope, we see legislation in France. Yes, they have the Nordic model, but of course they have more work to do. And the Pelicot case and subsequent ones, they centered on the concept which is called chemical submission. So to acknowledge this drugging as grievous bodily harm and that its intent is to overpower. It's not accidental. It's not a fetish. It's not a small thing. It's really, really serious. Language is important. I think chemical submission is a powerful term. I think this is much more powerful than the German term, which is knockout drops. This is what we call it. This is how we refer to the substances. In English, you say rape drugs. Why don't we say rape drugs in German? Are we too scared to name things for what they are? These are rape drugs. So this needs to be reflected in the culture, the language, and the law. And that is how, through Herculean effort over generations, we can change the culture to somewhere where this would be exceedingly rare and shocking and dealt with adequately and swiftly.
Yes, but there are still two more things. In Germany, we need reforms based on the Nordic model in the area of prostitution policy and also improved consent regulation for sexual acts. This means no is not enough. We need only yes means yes in our legislation. Only when people accept that the sexual act must be based on real consent, and that consent cannot be bought, we will have understood Giselle Pelicot's mission.
And when shame changes sides, so it's not shameful if somebody finds out that you were in prostitution, but if they found out that you were a buyer, then you'd have something to answer for. That's the goal. Thank you, Silvia. We touched so much ground in this conversation, and I hope people stayed with us and let us know their thoughts. Let us know what the Pelicot case meant to them, what they took from it. Thank you so much for your analysis and all the work you do.
Oh, Elly, thank you so much for your analysis and for your work. And I was very pleased and honored to be here with you. Thank you very much.
We hope you found this episode informative. To follow us on social media, click the links in the show notes below. If there is a topic you would like us to cover, you can contact us at redlightexposé.podcast@gmail.com or head on over to our website, redlightexposé.com. There you can also find a donation page if you'd like to support the show. All the hosts at Red Light Exposé are volunteers, so we rely on your donations to continue to compensate our survivor guests and cover operative costs. Thank you for listening. We hope you tune in next time.